And we're on. Welcome to the End of Seeking podcast, episode 33, with me, Martin.
And me, Imogen.
Welcome. It's been about a month and a half since we did one of these. I don't know why. We've had a busy old time.
It's been a very busy month and a half, yeah.
And should we do quick announcements before anything?
Yeah.
Do you have anything going
on? I have my twice weekly I meet with on a Zoom group Wednesday evenings at 7 p.m, 30-minute Divine Light transmission. And Sundays meet for satsang at 4 p.m. and an hour transmission at 5 p.m. So that's going on. And events that are coming up there, I have a 3-day retreat coming up.
Mm-hmm.
June 7th to 9th, I believe, is the dates. All the information is on the website.
Which is?
beyondimogen.com.
Brilliant. Okay. Nothing coming up for me until next month, so... But sessions are always available on the website, and if you like to read what I read, go there or go to Substack, martinweber.com.
Read what you read. Read what you write.
Read what I write.
Yes.
What did I say?
Read what you read.
Okay. Anyway, that's that. Okay, so what have we been talking about? There's so much we could talk about, but
yeah,
I'm going to jump in on, I've been reading Nietzsche.
A bit of light reading.
Well, I bought one. I read Nietzsche when I was young. I didn't even know what I was reading, really. I remember reading Thus Spake Zarathustra, which was this sort of prophetic masterpiece. But, obviously it's way beyond me. Anyway, I came across a while ago Nietzsche's view, a philosophy that he came to, which was called amor fati, which is Latin for love of one's fate.
Yes.
Which is to say, the love of all of it, the love of all of what happens to you, with you, in you, all your past, all your present, all your future. You've got to actually love all of that. That's the answer to our suffering, is to fall in love with all of it.
Yeah, all of existence.
And all of one's own particular fate within that. We call it fate, one's lot, one's thing. And I thought it pointed to something quite interesting, because we talk about falling in love with the present moment, right? Falling in love with what is. There being only the present moment. But I know a lot of your work in particular, you're working with, this recognition that a lot of our suffering is because we're trying to exclude or separate
parts of experience.
Yeah, or we perceive them or imagine them to be separate.
Yes.
And so the work of relieving, let's say, the suffering of existence born of that is to recognize, this too is... Yeah. Include this. To
bring it back to wholeness is where the separation is born, is where the suffering is also born.
Yeah. But that separation is a convention or a misapprehension.
There you go. Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but what struck amor fati as an interesting concept, idea, pointing, is that one of the ways in which we might exclude something, even come into some great wisdom and clarity, yes, I am in full non-resistant acceptance, I've discovered that aspect in the present moment. But you can also hear, but I did some horrible things when I was younger, I had some terrible experiences, and I wouldn't, so we're excluding what went before, our past. Yes. So we can accept, I'm fully in acceptance and surrender to this moment. Mm-hmm. I'm in love with this. Mm-hmm. But the past, not so much.
Of course, the past is also showing up in the present moment as a memory, as a relationship to something that seeming, to happen.
Yes.
Some time ago. Exactly. Is actually still the present moment, because that's when it's being experienced.
Yes, exactly. So it is included. And I mean, that's the thing about the including. It's not like you have to include it. You just have to recognize that it is already
I
included.
love that. Yeah, that's exactly how I see it as well. It's like it's not something you're doing. If you believe yourself to be a separate person, of course, that's where doing always applies, seemingly. But actually, it's always just the description of it is already included, and it is often a matter of noticing that.
Yeah.
Noticing that everything that arises is already arising and therefore is already included.
Yeah. But it's very easy to judge. I think Maharishi Mahesh Yogi said this: don't worry about the past, because the past is a lower state of consciousness.
Yeah, a lesser evolved state.
A lesser evolved state,
That's
that was it. Yeah.
the phrase.
Which is a great insight.
Yeah.
Don't worry about it. It's, you whatever we did or whatever happened, in before, happened because we were all doing our very best at the very time. And a regret is an interesting thing. I mean, that's come up for me, in latter years. Oh, but this, I wish I hadn't gone about it that way, or would have done it differently. And then you drop into that inquiry and go, well, how could that possibly have gone differently? What could, and you go, no. The whole thing was a perfectly spontaneous unfoldment of what was available at that
Couldn't
moment.
have done it a
Nothing
different way.
better, nothing, so actually, someone said this the other day. I read, regret is a good sign. It means you've grown, because you're looking back and go, I'm doing better now. I could do better now.
Yeah,
So,
I have more faculty available to me in terms of how I would view a situation and
Yes.
how I would interact and act in that situation. But the fact is that wasn't available to you
No.
back then, because otherwise you would have acted
you
in
would have
that
behaved
manner.
differently. Yeah.
And so, I think we were talking about it just a few days ago, talking about like regret and actually just coming to the realization, I don't think either of us really live with regret. Now, in hindsight, obviously there's certain things, I would do things differently now if I was faced with the same experiences, the same decisions, the same, ways I would interact with a person or something like this. Would I do it differently? Oh, yes, absolutely. But I can't regret it because I didn't know better. I didn't have that available to me in that moment.
I definitely had to process this.
Yes.
Over the last bunch of years, and because it came up as a thing. Oh, what we call regret. And it was really a calling for a sort of an inquiry into that. Right. And it revealed a lot of, we kind of know this, but revealing a lot about this way that in every given bleeding edge of the present moment, everything and everyone is doing its very best that it knows how to do in that moment. You can't expect anything different, because we're always aiming for the good. We're always even and this is a great philosophical insight, is to say that no one actually wishes evil for evil's sake. They wish evil and act evil because they misperceive it to be good. We're always seeking the good. We're always seeking the, for ourselves, and it's like, so there's this misperception that leads to what might call evil or bad. Again, these judgments, but this idea of regret and amor fati. So one approach is, we talk about forgiveness being such an important part of our process.
Yeah.
But
it's forgiveness doesn't start just with flat forgiveness for me. I feel like forgiveness, it goes through these stages. It's first the acknowledgement of the hurt that was caused, and then from there the compassion and the understanding of why that hurt was maybe caused, which is this.
So it's an understanding. Forgiveness is often based on understanding. Like, what can we?
And there comes the forgiveness, and actually to go even one step further, it's like then the forgiveness bottoms out in the recognition of there's nothing to forgive actually, because it had to go that way. That was the way it went. But it starts out with not forgiveness. It starts out, I think, with acknowledgement or recognition or understanding.
There's a hurt there, or there's something. A pinch.
Yeah.
Yeah, so But I love this amor fati thing. I mean, it speaks to. He spoke about it in this sort of totalizing way, which is all of it. You have to just take all of it, all that was, all that led to this, and he had this other. I can't remember quite what it was called now. It was again. This is a half thought experiment and half actually observation of
Right.
how to come to the right relation to reality. And one of it was like I think he called it something like eternal cycling or something. Like if imagine that from the moment of your birth to the moment of your death, everything in there, that whole sort of temporal experience of a life, and everything in it, all the quotes, mistakes, all the triumphs, all the thing. Imagine that at the moment of you start the whole thing again. You start the whole thing again. You start the whole thing again. It's like Groundhog Day. What happens?
Life as
Yeah,
Groundhog Day.
and that actually Groundhog Day is a great movie about amor fati. It's like, in some sense, it's like this eternal. I can't remember the eternal cycling or internal something. I can't remember. Anyway, but it's like when you feel into that reality, you've got to get past. You've got to get past regret. You've got to get past shame. You've got to get past judgments. Because if this is your reality, if this is your naked nails of the tree of life experience, how do you become fit for that kind of eternal reality?
How do you come to peace with this?
And so you have to accept the bad and the good.
Yes.
You have to accept all those judgments, good and bad, and you have to not just do that in order to remain free and sane.
Yeah, you have to actually let go of your
all
expectations.
in. You have to love it all. Not just accept it all, but love, right? I mean, you've talked about the love and acceptance being, really
synonymous.
synonymous.
Yeah, you have to let go of your expectations and sacrifice those in favor of coming to the peace in your heart with what is.
Yeah, whatever is.
Yeah. So yeah, it's that sort of famous Rumi quote of like, beyond the rights and the wrongs, there's a field, I'll meet you there.
Yeah.
It's that. You have to let go of those seeming rights and wrongs.
Yeah.
And instead appreciate the taste and the shadows and the lights of experiencing itself, and fall in love with experiencing itself, or your fate.
Yeah, exactly.
In these terms.
Yeah.
I said about forgiveness. You started to say there was two things, and we went off into forgiveness. What was the other thing you were talking of there?
Was that 3 minutes ago? I've definitely forgotten that.
I'm sorry. Fair dues.
What was it? I don't know. Forgiveness and what?
You didn't get to it.
Right. So no, forgiveness is, it opens the heart, softens the heart, dissolves regret, dissolves, shame, forgiveness of other, but also self. Always forgive, and just knowing that, knowing that I believe, I hold that our nature is evolutionary, that we grow, we evolve towards a more what? On what dimensions? The dimensions of greater love, actually, and greater truth and greater clarity. We're oriented.
Yeah. We're ever expanding in those terms. And for me, every experience is a way in which we come to know ourselves further in those ways.
So it's in a sense discovering the truth of our nature. You know,
Mm-hmm.
as we talk about what is the truth of our nature. It's this unity. It's this.
Mm-hmm.
It's being itself, and the qualities and the nature of that being is discovering that, because we are, let's say, very early on in this life, conditioned into a state of ignorance. We're not necessarily born that way.
No.
Maybe to some extent, but you know, we get what we are, what we need. But you know, so much of coming to clarity, coming to what we call awakening or enlightenment or whatever we want to call it, clarity, freedom, liberation. It's about coming to the truth that we already are.
Mm-hmm.
It's not really making ourselves into something different. It's actually uncovering or developing into our true potential, which was already
Which,
present.
interestingly, you know, to cycle back to the beginning of this, like, is where there is a total love of one's fate or one's experience or whatever word you want to use there. To me, this is the same as awakening.
Yes.
Except for what shifts is it goes from me doing that. So I need to fall in love with my fate, to a description of my nature is one that is in love with my fate.
Yes.
And in acceptance of my fate, in non-resistance to what is.
Yeah, I mean, so much of this coming to clarity is the recognition of the impersonal, non-personal nature of what's occurring, although that looks like personal for a while, something you do. We've talked about this often, how, you know, in the early stages of, or in the stages of awakening, where you come to it, you're doing it, you're meditating, you're sitting in satsang, you're inquiring, you're chanting your mantras, whatever it is, you're doing it, you feel like I have to get somewhere. But that sort of transitions, it sort of inflects at a certain point where you realize, oh, I'm actually being taken there. I'm being called back to the essence. It's like, I think of the opening scene to The Simpsons. Da, 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 da. And Marge is, you know, manically driving down the road, and sitting in the car seat next to her is little Maggie, I think, the baby, and she's got her own little toy steering wheel. And when Marge turns it, Maggie's turning it, and it looks like Maggie's doing the driving.
Do you know what? I use that analogy all the time, and you've just
really
dropped in where that analogy comes from. That is where that analogy comes from. I just hadn't ever put those two together.
Right.
But yes, I totally see that now. Okay.
And you know, if you've got your little steering wheel, and every time you turn it, you know, your mum's turning. You know, it's actually turning the car. And, you know, so you were never controlling the car is the bottom line to this. You were never, your little steering wheel that you've conjured up was never moving the car. And actually and I find this quite interesting actually in a human life. Why is it that the cracks don't show? Why the cracks that would betray the falsehood of personhood, for example? Why don't they show earlier? Because, you know, it's all, and this is it, life itself wants it to be, wants the illusion. I am anthropomorphizing life to some extent, but wants the illusion to be sustained for a while. And this is where you get the mindset of people going, well, you need to pull your socks out and you need to do it this way, and you've got control over your life and you've got free will. And because their experience is that works, if they go and exert themselves in some area, then they get a response. It feels like they're in control. They are Maggie in the car, and when they turn the wheel, the car turns. And that's what it feels like. And life is obviously supporting that. Then at a certain point, as you come into like this beginnings of awakening, you turn the wheel and it doesn't go the way you want it to go. Hold on. The crack starts to show. Hold on, this isn't going. You turn it the other way and the car doesn't turn the other way. It's like life starts to show you that, oh, no, you're actually not in control. That was an illusion which was supported actually by life itself for quite a while. Now it's time to come home
Yes.
and realize that the driver, the deeper driver, or well, as I think Lisa Karen said, no, there's nobody driving this dream bus. Something like that. Who's driving the dream bus? Nobody.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. We're touching then again on stages, right?
Yeah, I was just about to say, yeah, because that was actually something else we were talking about.
How meta. Yeah.
Yes, before we came on here today, we were talking about the stages of awakening or enlightenment, and it's something both of us talk about frequently, but maybe not super directly, and I'm not sure we have on this podcast just sort of addressed that
Explicitly.
explicitly. And it seems to me that in pretty much all traditions, there are, whether it's implicit or explicit,
Yeah.
there is a speaking to the development of awakening and the maturation process.
What are the
awakening.
ways in which it developmentally shows up?
Yeah.
Because, I remember for a long time, my whole, in years past, my even conception of what awakening or enlightenment really is, or the development of consciousness, was all a bit magical thinking and not really clear, because I really just understand it as a developmental process in a human being.
And actually it can, so I think there can be this very idea of it being a very binary thing.
Yeah.
Like either you're awake or you're not awake.
Yeah.
And that is true from the viewpoint of the personal identity, that this event horizon, this idea that there's going to be this thing that happens. Yes. But actually the reality of awakening is it is a developmental unfoldment, let's say. Yeah. People talk about levels of consciousness, and we were talking about this earlier. It's like there are no levels of consciousness itself. Consciousness just is.
Yes.
And all of this is consciousness.
Yes.
However, the perception of oneself as that can be occluded or veiled in or unseen in various ways, and that accounts for the stages or the development,
so-called post-awakening. Yeah. So dualistic perception of the world, you get into what one might call a dualistic perception of the world, but at those earlier stages, it's
a non-dualistic.
Sorry. Yeah. Thank you. Glad someone here is listening. Yeah. And I think we're on the same page with this, more or less. Actually, there are spiritual maps, and most traditions have them, and in one way or the other, they don't say, "Hey, it's a binary. You're either awake or you're not. You're either enlightened or you're not." There are a
few that do go with the binary idea, but actually,
well, I think that's because they don't understand that there are actually the reason why this is important is that typically the first stage of awakening, let's say, is to recognize that, oh, I'm not the person, I am the consciousness, right? The pure consciousness. But typically that shows up as what is known, let's say. So the knower becomes established as the pure knower, the cognizant, the self as consciousness alone in its pure state. That becomes established and recognized as one's identity. But somehow in that first stage you think, well, I'm awake then, that's it, it's all done. But often there's some perceptual lack of development or occlusion, cleanup that shows that, oh, the objects of awareness aren't self, and so aren't recognized as self yet.
Yeah, so ironically, that's why I don't tend to call that first stage non-duality, because ironically there is still a subtle duality there. It's a manageable duality, but it's like self and object are separate.
Yes.
So there's self as consciousness, that pure awareness, and the phenomenal arisings, there is a separation there.
Yeah, it's not seen to be integrated as self yet.
Yeah. And
but
that's a stage. To me, that is a
it
very
is,
clear
yeah.
stage. And for those
But
that
because
haven't gone through that stage, of course, they wouldn't recognize that that is a stage.
But
then.
compared to the one before, it's like, oh, this is enlightenment, and it kind of is. And
Yeah, it
but
is.
in some schools of Buddhism, they'd call that like stream entry. Yes, it is. There's no, the not self has been recognized. Your identity as consciousness, albeit in its pure form, witness, let's say, is established. But somehow there's an otherness about the relative thing.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a bunch of we were considering the metaphors that we might use to sort of describe this, and it's a pretty low resolution map, but it's pretty comprehensive as well, because okay, let me run through it and see what you have to say about it. So I'd say the first not even stage, but the common life of let's say avidya, ignorance, unseeing, that most people live in, is like a completely thick grey clouded sky.
Mm-hmm.
Just it's just clouds. That's all there is. Just clouds.
And let's just clarify what that is. What's clouds? What are you talking
yeah.
about?
It's
Clouds?
just well, I think it'll become evident as we talk about let's get the analogies out of the way. So, just an experience of this thing. But at a certain point, okay, Klaus, changing, experiencing, right?
Thoughts,
Changing,
feelings, sensations,
all
phenomenal arising.
that's all there is.
Yeah.
Okay, fair enough.
Thank you.
Yeah, all right. And then one day, by grace, a gap, the clouds will break,
Yeah.
and you'll experience the sky beyond, the pure, clear, unchanging sky.
Yeah.
You didn't even know it existed before. Most people don't even know there's the sky.
They think of themselves as the cloud.
As nothing
they
but
are
the changing,
nothing other than
experiencing
that.
of, yes. So
Yeah.
suddenly it breaks through the gap. This is what we call the gap. So it's like the gap in thinking. People might experience just a moment of, I've talked about this, as one thought ends and before another one arises, there's a gap, there's a silence.
Silent awareness.
And it's self, it's who I am. It's wow, I exist without any of this content.
Yeah.
So the gap.
And that can happen either spontaneously or if someone has got a meditation practice, often deep meditation can give rise to what people would call samadhi or a silence of mind in that
no
moment.
mind, or what we would call what's called in Sanskrit turiya, which is the fourth, which is the fourth state of consciousness after waking, sleeping, waking, dreaming, deep sleep. Those are considered those are the three states of consciousness that people are aware of.
Mm-hmm.
But they don't even aware that they're aware of. And then you might have this gap, which is to say, it's something else. It's the fourth. Anyway, so there's this gap in the clouds. And even if those clouds collapse back down, that'll change you forever. That's why people who have spiritual glimpses like that, it come upon them one day. It might even come through something not so great, like grief can, a sudden shock or something can stop the mind.
Yeah.
And give rise to this experience of no mind. It stumped the mind. The gap will appear.
Yeah.
And even if life itself, then the clouds come back together again.
Yeah.
It'll change you because you know it's there now.
People can also have that experience from, mystical, spiritual experiences of devotion and these things as well. So there's many ways in which those glimpses can come about.
As you say, learning like learning meditation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's the way it can come about.
So clouds, we've got to the point where there's a gap that has opened up.
Yes. Well, what was interesting, I think back to my path, I was really eclectically spiritual into all sorts of things. But I intuited and read and thought and reflected, but I was still living in that dense cloud.
Mm-hmm.
I hadn't experienced the sky yet. And I had a personal experience that led me to just stumped my mind.
Yeah, no mind.
And I went, oh, the truth I'm after isn't in this stuff. And for a moment, but it came through like a really strong personal dilemma that stumped me sufficiently that I had a glimpse.
Mm-hmm.
But I couldn't.
Just to say,
Yeah.
non-spiritual personal dialogue. So
Yeah.
like,
Oh, totally.
yeah.
It's just a very human dilemma that stumped my
so
mind.
these can come about in any
Exactly.
manner of,
But I couldn't. That was like the clouds opening up. There's a sky there, and then it shut right back down. And I knew then that sky was there.
yeah.
That truth was beyond that, but I didn't actually have access to it then.
And actually so people can have those glimpses, and that can ignite a lifelong of seeking, actually, a lifelong of trying to get back to the very thing that they know is there, but they have no access to anymore.
Yeah. For me, it was about 6 months later, I actually, it changed me. I went, oh, it's not in the books. It's not in the thinking. It's beyond it. I saw it, but I didn't know how to access it. And then about 6 months later, I learned how to meditate. And that was it. I was like, this is it. And then I had the ability then to access the gap. To that fourth state, that silent, pure awareness. And so I was out in my daily life. I was in the clouds.
Yeah.
Life, whatever. But then back, silence.
And this is what, people reporting frequently. I sort of work with people who repeatedly report this sort of in and outness.
Yeah.
They go to their meditation, and we'll be talking, the experience of noticing the sky is seen. And then they come back out, quotes, into daily life and in and outness of that.
And so that's the first stage. It's not just clouds. You're aware that, there's a sky beyond it, and you can access it in gaps.
Yeah, but it is an in and out feeling. It's either or. It's very binary.
It's clouds or it's sky. It's clouds or it's sky.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but awakening happens.
Yeah, so those are the first two.
So and maybe that gap gets wider as well.
And
maybe
longer,
it becomes more available.
Yeah.
It's still a binary.
Yeah.
But it's more and more available to you.
Yeah.
Like you'll rest in no mind more frequently, more easily.
Yes.
Whether that's through longer meditations or where just naturally you'll just abide in no mind for longer periods of time. But then when you're not in that.
Yeah, and people would say, I'm identified with my thought.
Exactly. I'm caught up, I'm
what
overshadowed.
That feels like, yeah. So it's a very binary thing, even though there can be greater and greater expanses of moments and time whereby you are, let's say, feeling like you are the sky.
Yeah, exactly. So that happens for long, binary of that. But then the next stage is the recognition that, it's not either sky or clouds. It's sky in which the clouds appear. And I am that sky.
And that is the first stages of awakening. Yeah. That's where there's an abiding of the recognition. The sky is abiding.
Yes.
I am the sky.
Exactly. But there are clouds. And that's okay because I'm the sky.
Yeah. And the clouds come and go. They pass. They are appearing and disappearing.
Yeah. They can do whatever they want. Storms or little summer days. Yeah. Some days the days are really clear. Some days it's full of chaos.
Yeah. And so this is, so I don't want to diminish this. This is a very profound
this
stage
is
of awakening.
what many people come to as a real stage of enlightenment. This is enlightenment. I've awoken to the self outside, and I am not the clouds. I'm the sky.
Yes, and the recognition that you are always the sky.
Yeah, it's unchanging. It's ever present, open, spacious, formless.
Yeah. Even if within that, lots of clouds come and go, and that's what's changing, and that's what's coming and going, and that is always the case.
Now, one of the problems in this domain is that some people think that's it.
Yeah,
that's the final.
And some people can hang out there for a lifetime,
Yeah.
maybe.
And that's fine. It's certainly better than,
It is,
being
yes.
a mess of dark clouds. But this final stage of awakening, then, so
Yeah.
we have complete ignorance. Then we have the emergence of the awareness that there's a gap, that there's a consciousness, that there's a sky. Boom, that I'm not intermittently. Then the ground. So the ground becomes the star. I'm the sky,
Yeah.
and in me, all these clouds can come and go, but I am ever the same, unchanging,
Yeah, and so
pure.
this would be like, I use the language of, and I think you do broadly as well, like the ground of being. This is like akin to the recognition
Yes.
of I am that ground of
Yes.
being. I am consciousness.
Yes.
I am awareness. Whatever words you want
Yeah.
to use here, but that's what we're talking about
Yeah.
here. And just before we go on to the next stage, I want to just reiterate to those that are listening here, these are very broad strokes. There's lots of minutiae in the way that shows up, and
Sure.
the integration of this and all of that.
Yeah,
Yes,
how
we're just talking about the broad strokes of stages of enlightenment.
But let's make this point as well. That's huge.
It's huge, yeah.
To just those who even grok the gap,
Yeah.
and who can reliably then, access the like, what we call the gap. That's spiritually advanced, right?
Yes.
It's you're ahead of, most people are still living in the clouds, and that's it, literally.
Yeah.
So you have this availability, and so you see advanced practitioners, meditators, whatnot. They have more access to Zen. Just no mind.
Yeah. And so then, yes, we have that
flip. It's a
over
recognition
into this, the I am that sky, and that's abiding, that recognition. So now the fourth one we're going to go into.
Yeah. So that becomes we need a different metaphor for it.
Yes,
and that's why
that's what
now
we were
there's a
talking
transmission from that metaphor, and how can we use one metaphor all the way through, which is the sky, the clouds, and all that. Sure, maybe, but actually a better metaphor now for the whole nature of this reality and the recognition that comes about is more like an ocean. It's a better analogy for it.
Because I just want to say why that, because there's still a subtle sense of duality between the sky and the clouds, and that's why it's like ultimately that isn't a sufficient metaphor.
Yeah, the clouds aren't the sky.
Yeah.
The sky is more like, the idea is it's the space in which the clouds exist.
Yeah.
But what are the clouds then? They're not me. They're different from me.
Yeah.
Right? That's the sense of it.
Yeah. And so that works for the initial stages of awakening. That analogy of the sky and the clouds is really helpful and really works. But ultimately, the subtle duality there, it needs to be, it needs to actually come into a true non-dual recognition, rather than a manageable non-dual, a manageable duality.
Manageable duality, which is still awake and enlightened, but there's a duality there. And that's the question you've got to ask is, if in these states of of awakening enlightenment, you could be well advanced, you could be in this state of, I am the boundless, formless self. Mm-hmm. But is there a sense of a subtle perception of duality, or this idea that what arises is, not I, not self?
Yeah.
Because reality is non-dual, which is, say, reality is singular. There's no. So I'm going to read out. Let's do the metaphor, the final metaphor. Let's say, which is the oceanic metaphor.
Yeah.
Which is rather than being the sky and clouds, a better way to analogize this would be to say, reality is more like an ocean. Mm-hmm. And at the deepest depths, it's pure silence,
stillness,
absolute silence, and that
empty of form.
It's just completely. But then activity arises as you come closer to the surface, and then throughout it, there's all these eddies and currents and waves and everything, and all within this ocean. There's all these different forms. The swirling energies and stuff will give rise to all these different forms, different characteristics, different things. But at its deepest level, pure silence. But this is not two things. There isn't silence and dynamism as two separate things. It is one singular reality
within which everything occurs,
the total
arises, falls, but is never separate from
No.
that one singular reality.
Yes. And in fact, all the forms and all the things are vibrations of this field of silence, permutations, vibrations of this singular
Yeah.
substance.
So the waves are the ocean.
Are the ocean.
Yeah.
Yeah. This came up the other day when I was talking with someone. It was the question of this idea that, you know, in order to get to the truth in ourselves, we have to sort of traverse and go deeper and deeper. And that's true in some sense. We use that. It's really important to get to that first stage we're talking about, which is the recognition of the silent ground of being. You have to, and in a sense, you have to kind of traverse the activity of the mind and the body, just come down to this silent, and you go, oh, there, and it's seen as its own thing. But then
so you're going from the waves, you're actually recognizing, you're going into
Yeah.
the depths of the ocean,
Yeah.
recognizing there is a silence in the in the ocean.
But there's this subtle. Then it's almost implied. It's subtle. It's not implicit. Sorry, it's not explicit. It's implicit that we got to get past.
Yes.
Right. So then you come into this view. Oh, whatever's arising is it. Whatever's arising is that truth too, and that's the oceanic view. When a wave comes to you, that's as much self as the silent depths.
Mm-hmm.
It's all that, and that's true non-duality, which is to say the non-duality of subject and object, of you know, absolute and relative. These are not.
Yeah, they're two sides of the same coin. There's still the ocean. It's like whether you're talking on the level of the waves or whether you're talking on the level of the silent depths of the ocean, it is still the ocean.
Yeah.
So whether you're talking about the relative or the absolute, it is still consciousness.
And it's singular, it's one, it's non-dual.
Yeah.
I wrote just a little thing I pulled out, which is to say, there's not a whisper of separation or duality in the nature of what is. Contrasts abound in relative appearance, but all boundaries are merely conventions. The fundamental unity of existence is never breached. It is only faulty conception based on faulty perception that has it appear to be so. Nice. So that's the, you know, you ain't done as long as there's any whisper or whiff of duality. But sometimes you could be in a awaken. Many people who come into the sort of awakening, and they haven't even recognized yet that there's still some conceptual, perceptual duality in the system that needs to be, you know, worked through.
Yes.
So, you know, this is why stages of awakening, just the recognition that there are, let's say, stages of awakening from one perspective.
Yes, and also I was having a conversation with someone this week about that, and for a personal ego, they see that as a mountain to climb and master. It's like, right, I've got to get to this goal and I've got to achieve this, and it's actually, it's what these stages is a description of the natural unfolding. It's not something you achieve, and it's not something you go out there and do. It's just it's leaving the breadcrumbs so that it's recognized that this is what is unfolding naturally in the transformation from the personal to the impersonal, from the transformation from the small self to the unified recognition of the self. Yeah. It's not something we do, it's something that occurs to us, that happens. That the I use the word veils. It's like there's these thinning of these delusional misapprehensions of the nature of who and what you are. So I don't want this to be like a setup of like, right, I've got to get to all these different stages. It's like, no, this is the natural unfolding, and any impulse you have to meditate or do these things is part and parcel of this unfolding happening.
And I would say certainly past that first stage, let's say stream entry, you would say in some schools of Buddhism, you know, when the or
cosmic consciousness,
in
Maharishi Mahesh
or
TM.
LOC, whatever, in certain schools of that. That first stage you're in, no self. Oh, I'm not the small self. I'm actually this consciousness, this formless, boundless awareness.
I'm not a solid mind-body experience. I am that which is prior to the
Yes,
solid
and
mind body
knows
experience.
it and experiences it. But one of the distinctions that comes after that is, for the most part, although it can pop up, the 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 notion that you're doing any of it falls away after that first stage. And so this movement from, let's say, cosmic consciousness, this, stream entry to unity, is
Brahman.
pretty much a spontaneous. It has its sort of it has a non-retrogression about it. It'll go on under its own steam now.
Yeah.
It seems to me, even though I would say this, even though doership, the sense of doership, more or less can fall away after awakening, but not always.
Not always, because
No.
if it's not sufficiently questioned, there can be a leftover vestiges of, just an assumption there that is running in the background without ever being questioned.
It is funny, actually, and I, as an aside, I noticed in Vedanta and Advaita and whatnot, you will see more or less a greater emphasis on non-doership.
Yes.
And some teachers, exponents of this traditions, will be more or less interested in this and less so. But it's funny, I don't see so much of it in Buddhism. Just really doesn't necessarily go there. And I wonder whether part of it is to do with like the Buddha, the historical Buddha's own interest in only that which liberates. Not really that interested in precisely describing the nature of reality, only in as much as it's liberating.
Well, the doership thing can be a tricky one because it can really be co-opted and distorted by the ego. If the ego gets hold of that,
Yes,
it's a really tricky place. I've noticed you have to be really careful and discerning as to how those ideas of non-doership are introduced.
yes,
If they're introduced too early, it can cause an awful lot of, I'm not doing any of this.
The mind will get hold of it and use it as another ego device.
Yeah, exactly. So I wonder if that might be something.
Well, I remember when I was studying in MIU in America, and I did an essay on free will, and
yes, that was a good one.
deconstructed it. This was pre-awakening, but it was already the idea that free will was a thing was just unsustainable. Even though I could feel, I had a sense of that I had free will, on any reflection or analysis, it just wasn't there. And so I sort of, I analyzed it from various viewpoints. One of it was, just the evidence of our own experience, seeing how thoughts, impulses just spontaneously arise from seemingly nowhere. There's certainly no one can be found pulling, if you take a moment to look at your own experience, you can sort of deconstruct your sense of.
Oh yeah, it falls apart.
It falls apart really
quickly. Too easily for some people. It brings a lot of fear because it's too easy to see through that.
Yeah, but I remember one of the references was the Bhagavad Gita, which was the preferred, spiritual text of the TM movement, Maharshi, and he'd written a good commentary on that. But it's a powerful scripture and book about the nature of, technically, what the nature of our consciousness and whatnot, and how our intellect and conscience functions and all this. But one of it was, witness that, in all cases, the powers of nature, let's say, are performing all activities that we see. So even the breath and the eyes opening and closing, even that is not under our power. It's just the gunas of nature just operating in that way. So we're not doing any of it. And then in the next breath it says, but the wise shouldn't tell the ignorant. This is Bhagavad Gita. Yeah. But the wise shouldn't tell the ignorant that this is the case, lest they might, fall into inactivity. So at one breath, it's telling you that this is it. So it's presuming you are the wise. But at the same time, you shouldn't really go making a case of this to the unwise or to the people who are caught up in their own their own life of, you know, worldly life. And this leads on to another part of how spiritual teaching needs to be delivered in the right way at the right time for the level of the person who's seeking it and receiving it. And you can't bully someone into shattering the ego or shattering their worldview.
Yeah.
There has to be a kind of a dance of consent in which, you know, one is helped and guided and leads
At their
oneself
pace, yeah.
at the pace at which they're ready and willing to unfold. And there's got to be a trust in that.
And even the difference of teaching between sort of first stages of awakening and the more latter ones of unity, even that, you know, those, you know, for me, I've seen you can like leave breadcrumbs of insight there in terms
up ahead
of
to what's next, sort of thing.
sort of how it's unfolding. But to go straight there often causes more confusion and doubt of one's own experience than if you just attend to what the actual experience is in that moment.
Yeah, it's skillful means, isn't it? It's meeting the person where they are, and
entirely,
and in so much of it, it's about their own resonance and unfolding, because it's not about dragging someone or ourselves to a state which we desire. It's more about what did Jean Klein, I think, said, you know, enlightenment is total cooperation with the inevitable.
I love that.
You know, that's a wild kind of idea. Those one's cooperation and one's inevitability are somehow two sides of a same coin.
Which is why it accounts for why certain teachers and teachings resonate at different times. And even someone could pick up a book and hear certain things from that book and then come to it 5 years later and hear completely different things. And so, like, for me, I feel like I put quite a bit of emphasis on this because I think maybe I had a personal burning of what it is to, you know, feel like I should be somewhere that I'm not in my sort of spiritual path, let's say. And so it's to really honor where you find yourself, yet still being aware of the path that is possible. And that path is uniquely your path, as in the pace of it, how it will unfold, what it looks like, what it feels like, what it tastes like. And yet there are, and I think that's why today we're talking in very broad strokes, there are maps of enlightenment, stages of enlightenment that are much more specific, much more detailed. But I think you and I sort of are aiming to be very broad stroke about this. And I quite like that, because I think people can start to look to the map more than the terrain in terms of awakening, and they're then checking off. It's almost like the map becomes this checklist of things they have to achieve, and it's like, to me, it's like, no, there's just some breadcrumbs here as to how this can unfold, but the lived reality of what that looks like for you and how that goes,
how that interacts with the particulars of your situation
is so uniquely yours. And it's like consciousness is unveiling itself to itself in this completely unique fragrance, in the same way each flower is completely unique, and yet it is still a flower that is unfolding. And so I just want to put that in there as a sort of a caveat or a counteract to this idea of, I've got to hit my goals of, stages of awakening. And it's like, no, this is just about leaving some breadcrumbs of possibilities, so that I think if we don't have that, because I see some traditions, they sort of dismiss these ideas of stages of awakening, or whatever words you want to use there, and what happens there is there becomes this sort of blindness or complacency, or this sense of I'm done. And where there's this sense of I'm done, there can be some stagnant.
Well, there'll be some blind spots.
Yeah, that's
and I
what
mean,
it was,
that's
yeah.
what we see in some awakened people. I mean, as many people on various ways, and there's still some blind spots.
Yeah.
And so, not done. There's still this blind spot there, and it's a blind spot until it's not a blind spot. You go, oh, why didn't? Oh, that, and then
Yeah.
pop, that changes.
Yeah. And I think we're all have that potentiality.
And we get it when we
yeah.
do, though. I mean,
Exactly.
it comes about as a natural consequence of our fate.
Yeah.
Each one of us has
There we go.
our fate
Yeah.
that we must love into existence. It's just perfectly.
Yeah.
It's just interesting, the stages thing, because even though everyone is unique, you get a couple of people at roughly the same stage, and they report not different, but a very similar
Yeah.
structure of reality. It's correlated to paradigm.
Yeah. The language they may use,
Yeah,
the
the
way
way
in
that-
which they describe it may be different, and yet the fundamental what they are talking about is the same. I mean,
It's typical of that stage.
I mean, I use the example of you and I, for instance. We talk and we teach and we speak in many ways very different tone or texture to it, and yet we're speaking of the same thing.
Oh yes, indeed.
And so it's like, and I think that's, to me, what's so beautiful about life is there's infinite expressions of the same
Yeah.
nature of reality. And once you come to a stage of recognizing the nature of reality in a certain manner, say the sky, the first stages of the sky, recognizing you are the sky and there's clouds, your whatever language or analogies you use or ways of describing that, still it is fundamentally being described as the ground and the content.
Yeah. Right. Yes. The broad strokes, the essentials.
Yeah. And that's why I think broad strokes is very helpful.
Yeah.
To be able to.
It's just low res. It's a
Yeah.
complete map. Like this, what we've outlined is, in a sense, more or less a complete, map. And don't get me wrong, there are all sorts of, who knows what other great different possibilities there are. But it's just it's low res. But actually, that's kind of enough, because the rest of it is about the detail of your own reality,
Yeah.
how that unpacks, how one transitions to the next. Let's say
Yes.
how one idea or conception yields to its own logical next. Oh, it's not that, it's this, and we mustn't be fearful that we're not going to get what we need and get the right thing that comes to us at the right time, because it is all self. And so any teaching, let's say, or pointing that comes to you from outside is in fact just your own self
Exactly.
offering up that for you. Don't be frightened to take things from outside, because there is no outside. It's all self.
As long
But
as
it's how it resonates.
Yes, exactly. That's what I was going to say. As long as it lands in your heart in a manner in which you feel there's a yes for that.
Yeah, that kind of the truth meter we have in our own being.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Okay, that was fun. That's nice to be back after how many, 6 weeks or something? We're rubbish, but okay. Please feel free to subscribe if you want to hear the next episodes, and like it if you like it. That's always helpful. And if you feel like sharing it with someone who you think might appreciate it, we're quite happy to have you do that. We welcome it.
Yes. All right, everyone. Bye for now.
Bye for now.